Hi, welcome to Art by Annamarie. I'm Annamarie, and today I'm going to do a little bit of a delve deeper episode with the colour green. So I want to show you, if you are new to watercolours or you are a beginner watercolour, and actually even if you are an intermediate watercolour artist, how to make and mix up your own greens using 4 essential colours. And when I worked this out, I actually was only about 3 years ago. So if you haven't worked this out yet, then don't be embarrassed, because it took me a long time to stop using commercial greens. What I want you to do for this episode is you can paint along with me. I'm not speeding a lot of things up, but for reference purposes, I'm going to be making a series of different green colors, and I want to show them to you, and then I want to create an artwork to show you how you could use these different greens. So follow along with that. First thing I want to do is show you all the colours that I'm going to be using, and these are interchangeable if you don't have exactly the same blues and violets and reds. I've got 2 blues on the screen to show you because I'm going to use the intense blue later on for some of the detail, but I wanted to show it to you now so you can get it ready. I like to set my palette up in exactly the same way every time I paint. I have my yellow on one side and my blue opposite, so then I can join my green and my blue, my yellow and my blue together. For this bottom row, I want to show you what it looks like just combining blue and yellow. You might assume that blue and yellow are always going to make green, which they are, but in this case, if I use a little bit more yellow, we're going to have a brighter green. Continuing to add more green into my, more yellow into my base green is again going to make the grass look a little bit more sunny. And this is a really good thing to keep in mind if your grass is going to be in the foreground, or if you have a tiny bit of grass in the background that is being hit by the sun. It's really good to see how far you can push the yellow. I think I've pushed it far enough. So I'm going to take my blue and yellow again, but I'm going to go towards the blue side of the green, just adding more blue into my base green. And you can see there I have a good shadow green. It is very much on the blue scale, but it's really good for backgrounds and shadows of trees and shadows of grasses. And it's even okay to put in some water scenes. And it's a very good complementary colour to use with your really bright yellowy green. I'm really just trying to see how far I can push this colour palette. Just play around with it, see if you have to get back to your standard green and then add more blue, then that's what you have to do. It's your palette, so you play around with it to see how you want it to look. So we've mixed up our basic green here, just with the yellow and the blue. This is the base green that I always start with. I like to have a kind of control green so that I know where I'm starting from. Put my control green in the middle, just so I can have a look at the color of it and see that I'm happy with it. I think it's an even amount of blue and yellow. It's not too light, it's not too dark. Introducing the violet into this base green is a game changer. You're going to suddenly see what a shadow green looks like. It's just gorgeous, and it dries really lightly. You'll see later when it dries. Try mixing a little bit more and seeing how close to the grayscale you can actually get it. It'll still have a tint of green in it, which I think is just, it's so helpful when you're painting something in green. I'm adding a bit more blue into that purple, into the violet, and that makes it a little bit cooler as well. So you can have, when you're making your shadows for your grass or your trees, you don't just want a blue shadow or a violet shadow. You want to think about which shadow is being cast, and is it a lighter shadow or a darker shadow. So that's what we're doing on the green scale, our different shadows. I think I've pushed that far enough without kind of delving too deep. So we're going to have a look at adding a little bit of the red onto the palette. So again, I'm going to start off with my base green. It's in there somewhere. I keep quite a messy palette. You might be a little bit more organized than me, but I'm just taking the yellow and the blue again to try to find that base green, matching it up with my base green again, and I'm pretty happy with that. So if I add a little bit of red, you can kind of guess what you think is going to happen just from primary painting at primary school. It does make a brown, but in this case it makes a really fantastic, what I like to call a drought green. You know, if you're in a country that hasn't had a lot of water and you're thinking, you know, you don't want to just do plain green grass, this is that really excellent kind of yellowy green. So I do tend to use this red with an extra amount of yellow, and it makes that really lovely dry brittle grass. I've changed the paintbrushes because I'm going to wash on a very light green. I'll go through a paintbrush explanation with you guys another time. At this point, you want to just use a new piece of paper if you want. I'm using the same piece of paper. I'm just going to do a little bit of a grass scene. We're going to paint it together. We're actually laying on a bit of light green. If you look at the swatches that we've done below, they're all dried. I'm taking the real basic light green from the first swatch that we did, adding a little bit of extra blue with it. I'm laying it on really lightly. It's not going to take a long time to dry this layer. I'm not 100% sure if you're even going to see this layer in the end product, but I think that doing a bit of an exploration with the color green, we kind of want something in the background that isn't white, in my opinion. So I'm taking a very shadowy green for the top, which kind of is a bit sky-like. I'm mixing my purple. Don't be afraid to kind of make it however you want to make it. Everybody's palette is going to be slightly different just by how much water you add. I've added enough water to make my paintbrush wet, but as you can see, I haven't actually made any washes. So I'm kind of hoping that this paint is going to dry quite quickly. I'm already deciding on an angle for my grass. You can see I'm going diagonally. You can go straight up and down. You really just got to do what's comfortable for you. I'm putting in some of the background colors there, and then I'm going to go for some of my my greens after this dries a bit more. I'm going to get ready a couple of oranges. If you've followed me for a while, you know I love to combine orange and green. It's one of the things that go really well together. I'm getting the orange ready. They're intricate to this painting because I want the painting to look nice. Whatever orange you have at home will do. I've got a light orange and a dark orange that I'm playing around with at the moment, and they're just going to be for the flowers later. We're not going to use them right now. So I'm creating my base layer that I'm going to use as the foundation for my grass. My background's dry, and I'm just mixing up my yellow and my blue, and then applying it very abstractly on the angle. Flatten your paintbrush out, and then as you come to the tip of your grass, you lift it off the page, and that creates a little bit of a point. If it doesn't, just add a bit of water and start again. These little tips of grass, you can see that is a very standard green. You can see it in the middle. That's the color I'm using. So if I introduced a bit of violet at this point, we're going to get a little bit darker. And I'm dabbing the violet grey, greeny color in at points of the grass where I think there might be a little bit of a shadow. This is a really light touch. You can do it with a heavier touch as well. It just will depend on what kind of a painter you turn out to be and what makes you happy about painting. I tend to be quite exact and precise, and I like things to be a little bit, I'd like to to go over things several times as opposed to putting on one big giant mark on the page. You might be different. You can see that the grass is becoming a little bit tonal now because we've got the greys and we've got the purples and we've got the greens and we're adding the blues and we're doing the reds, so it's going to look a little bit dry in places and it's going to look really shadowy. All this paint is still wet as well, so it's going to continue to move. There's not an enormous amount of water. I do every now and then kind of dab a bit of water in. It's not an enormous amount of water, so it's going to kind of stay where you've put it, but it's going to look a little bit more blended. When your paint is not completely dry yet, and I call it shiny, it's not super wet, you can start putting in your flowers. I'm doing really abstract dots as my flowers, and they're just going to be blowing in the breeze. Putting them on some of the green that is still wet means that that orange is going to blend into your green, but that's not going to be a problem because we're going to go over the layer again as well. And it will, when you do a couple of layers in watercolor, you start to learn that your base layers create a mood and an atmosphere. So this is going to create a kind of windy atmosphere. I'm using quite thick watercolor at this point. It's definitely not a wash, it's definitely watercolor. I'm laying the light orange first, and then I came back and I got quite a heavy amount of red pigment and put that next to the orange, and even though it's very detailed, it's still going to blend really well. I change back to green now so that I can add some of the extra leaves, and I like to work in the wetter paint with the flowers, so sometimes you just go back and add a little bit of extra water and a little bit of extra detail, and then you can see where you want to put your flowers. I'm just dotting them on. I've got quite a thin brush. I think it's a number 1 sable. And they're literally just dots. I don't want it to become muddy and I don't want it to be too detailed. I'm dotting on the orange dots, and then I'm going to come back with redder dots as well, just to add a little bit of depth and shadow. I'm just adding a little bit of extra grass over onto the right hand side of the painting again because I'm going to add some more flowers, and this grass has dried a little bit, and I do like the blended effect and the bleeding effect that some of the flowers have got. I'll go over these again when they're dry so that they're a little bit more defined, but the flowers that kind of bleed into the grass colour in the background help add the effect of wind and the blur that happens when flowers and grass are blowing in the wind. So you don't want it to be too exact, you actually do want it to be a little bit blended. You want to make sure these dots aren't in a complete line either. Mixing, like finding that fine line between a nice line of flowers and a row of flowers. I'm not 100% sure if you can hear all the animals in the background. We're actually moored up and there's quite a lot of ducks and moorhens and other things that are squawking at the camera at the moment. So just finishing showing you this bit here where it has dried. You can see there how much it has blended in. I have left this for a while now in the sun because I want to go over the next coat while it is bone dry. If you're in a facility that has a hairdryer, now's a great time to use the hairdryer. Do not start on this layer with a wet painting. So going in with quite a pigmented orange again. I'm not adding a lot of water. I'm not dry painting, but I'm not putting down a wash. And I'm going completely back over those bits of flowers that I put down earlier with the orange and the red. And you'll see this time that they don't meld into everything. Remember me mentioning earlier the blue that I had on my palette? Well, I've also combined it with a white gouache, and you're going to see that I'm just dabbing tiny bits of this light blue gouache mixture, and you can barely see it, but what that does is it just creates another layer of something that catches your eye, and that's really what's going to make your paintings pop. So this is my absolute favorite blue. If you use this blue, it's going to make a really bright green. So the blues that you choose to make your greens are going to obviously impact the colors you have. So you see here, this is a really, would you call it an emerald, like a light emerald green or something? It's that really delicious. Almost, if you used it by itself, it would look like a really fake green. But just in the foreground where you're thinking it needs to pop, it's actually a gorgeous green, and I'm carrying it into the flowers. Mixing the blue with the gouache, the white gouache, is such a great idea for putting something on top of watercolor, because usually watercolor has to be made as a complete picture. It's not like acrylics where you can paint over it and paint over it. The gouache is going to be your best friend if you need to introduce an element like this with just some stringy bits of lighter grass. That's invaluable for how you create that kind of effect. Don't worry about how full my palette is either. I keep a very messy palette, but I do continually use the same palette. So I'll activate those colors tomorrow. I'll activate them next time I paint, and they never go to waste, which is, I think, one of the things that I like about watercolors more than acrylics. Is with acrylics, I'd always be covering up my paints and with cling film or something like that. Whereas with watercolors, I can just reactivate them. If I just added yellow at this point onto my flowers, it would really blend in. Mixing it with the gouache, the white gouache, is going to make it sit on top of the other watercolors. And it's just a tiny bit of detail, but it really adds an extra layer, an extra depth and movement and fun to the painting. So you are just dotting these little happy flower dots onto your painting. You can't get this bit wrong. Finally, I've taken the white gouache and I've mixed it with the tiniest amount of green, and I'm putting in some very spindly little bits of grass. Really, there's no end to what you could have continued to do with this painting. You could make a big, long landscape painting of this kind of grass. You can play around with it. You could put it on a card to somebody, but it's just a lot of fun to play around with. You could change the flower colors, so you could have a field of bluebells, and you could also change the greens that you're using. But having a look there, you can see you're not even really thinking of how many greens like that. We used all of those greens, and you're not even thinking, oh, that's a very multicolored field of greens. You're just thinking how well that all fits in together. And I'm really proud of that. I think it looks really atmospheric. It looks really happy. It looks positive, but it also has a lot of depth to it as far as playing around with the actual painting. There we are. A different palette of just using green. You can make the greens that you buy commercially in the shops, but I find if you're doing grass or trees or leaves or things like that, it's so much easier, it's so much more effective if you just mix up your own green. You saw just then, spending a little bit of time with me, mixing up my greens, that you can have, very definitely have a whole set of greens without even introducing the red and the purple if you're feeling like that's too much for you. But as soon as you start introducing the red and the purple, you have to buy less greens because you can buy all these colors and have them done for you already, but it just makes so much more sense to mix on the palette. So give us a comment down below and let me know if you like this kind of color explaining, and we can maybe suggest another secondary color that we could make and see how that turns out. But at the moment, that is a little delve into the color green. If you have liked it, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe because we've got painting tutorials, we've also got daily paintings, and we have a little delve deeper series like this. So thanks for watching. Bye!